If you've got a left shoulder pain that's been diagnosed as an impingement, you're going to want to watch this video. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand, and it is perfect. All right, Wednesday, press for time. Got to crank this one out, so we're going to dive right into the Q&A. This one comes from Jason, and so Jason said he had an interesting case. He was struggling to interpret the chessboard, and so that's exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to take a look at this chessboard, at least the information that he's going to provide to us, and then we will try to deconstruct this thing a little bit. So what we want to do is we want to look at the measures that Jason took, and we're going to start by reconstructing the pelvis, because the pelvis representation is a little bit easier to see than it is in the thorax, but we'll try to give you an example of what this actually looks like. So let me grab the pelvis for a sec. So again, this is a guy with left shoulder pain that's been diagnosed as an impingement, but we've got some pelvis measures, which are great because our iterations give us confirmations of positions, and like I said, it's a little bit easier to see in the pelvis. So when in doubt, we're going to start with the basic foundation. So Jason says that this guy is a narrow ISA. So right away, we know we're going to see a representation that's going to start to ER these ilium. We're going to start to counternutate this sacrum. Now, he throws us some information. On the left side, we've got left hip ER at 60. We've got IR at 20 degrees on this side. So remember, when we're talking about narrow ISAs, that we're always going to be biased back towards an ER position. So we're going to have more ER than IR. If we have full excursion of the hip under those circumstances, we're going to have about 100 degrees of total excursion. So right away, when we start seeing 60 degrees of ER, 20 degrees of IR, we know we're in a deficit, and so we probably have some measure of loss of that external rotation that we would naturally gain from just being a narrow ISA. So we're going to start thinking that, oh, we've got an anterior orientation going on here. Now, if we flip over to the other side, we go to the right hip, and we get a 45 degrees of ER, 45 degrees of IR. So now what that's going to tell us, again, we've got an anterior orientation, but we've got a lot more going on the right side. So right now, we got to start thinking like, okay, I'm on this oblique axis because I've got a greater loss of ER here. If I've got 40 degrees of internal rotation under these circumstances, I got a pretty decent tilt here, because the only way that I'm going to pick up 45 degrees of IR under the circumstances is to get the acetabulum facing down. So I've got a situation that looks like this. And actually, if we want to get really technical, watch this close, it's going to look kind of like that. Okay? That's more like what we're going to see with this type of a right oblique axis, where you're going to see sort of like an elevation of this ilium. The reason I bring this up is because what it's going to look like in the thorax is going to be very similar. So it's going to look kind of like that. Okay, so under these circumstances, I actually have the same orientation in the thorax as I do in the pelvis. And so when we look at the shoulder measures now, so if we look at the chessboard, we've got a lot of internal rotation deficit on the left side, and most likely we're going to have an ER deficit on that right side. Now, why doesn't it measure that way on the table? So as he lays back on the table, because of the orientation, he's going to fall back into the right. And so what that does is it magnifies our ER measure. So we always have to be aware of what the constraint is that we're measuring against. So pay attention to that. Now, so how are we going to undo this thing? So we have a right oblique axis. So we know we got to be pushing back on this left oblique. We might need a place to go here, because if we look at the pelvis as a representation, I'm going to have some concentric orientation here that's going to hang on to this ILA of the sacrum as I tip on that axis. So I got to be careful here, and I might need to address that first. So what we may have to do is go into a hook line position to address that and sort of build this from the ground up. So I'm going to create a yielding strategy on the left side, and I'm going to push that right side forward, potentially in hook line. If I can move to other positions that are going to keep the shoulder in a non-provocative position, so I want to be below that 90 degrees where I'm typically going to feel the discomfort, then maybe I can use some form of posterior lower expansion activities. I could use my supine cross connect, which I just love, because that actually uses the compensatory strategy on the right side to create us some expansion on the left side and recapture the position of this ischial tuberosity. So I got to pull this ischial tuberosity back down, and so that supine cross connect allows us to do this. Now, as I work on this person, I want to make sure that I'm maintaining this left posterior expansion and then starting to drive the right side forward. One of the easier ways for me to do this actually is to roll them to their left side and create a middle propulsive activity, and I can throw a right reaching activity on top of that, and that's going to help me create this actually posterior left diagonal that I'm going to need to offset the right oblique axis tilt. This can eventually become a right armbar activity, but again, I want to start in these non-provocative positions to start. If I still can't get the shoulder to where I want it to go, if you look at the chessboard, we did have access to about 90 degrees of shoulder flexion. So I actually start to create this middle propulsive strategy in a prone activity by driving it from the pelvis upward. So again, I'm going to get my left turn. I'm pushing with the right lower extremity to help create that right oblique axis. As I'm working through this middle propulsive range, I can do an offset push-up, which creates a very similar representation as it would to the high-low press, but again, I'm moving closer and closer to that 90 degrees of shoulder elevation. So again, as to when you're going to implement this, it's going to depend on where the symptoms are and how much shoulder flexion that you're gaining. This can now actually be done in the gym to some degree as well. So I can use my old school triceps kickback. If I use my left arm support as I kick the dumbbell back in this triceps activity, what I'm actually doing is I'm compressing that right scapula against the thorax, which is again my turn back and to the left on the oblique axis. Eventually, of course, I want to get you standing up, so I got to account for that. I love my chops under these circumstances. I can start in a staggered stance. I might be able to do this right away. I can make it kind of look like a triceps activity at first, so I don't take the shoulder into that provocative position. But I'm going to create the posterior left oblique shift by pushing through that right foot, and eventually I just expand outward in my chopping activities. I turn that into more of like a side split or a side split squat. And then ultimately what I want to be able to do is I want to get my arm above shoulder level. So this is going to progress to a landmine situation. What I want to do here is probably start with my right arm. Again, it's going to help me create this backward left oblique axis position that I'm trying to drive to offset the right anterior oblique. Jason, I hope that gives you a couple of ideas to work with, at least to get you started. And for all of you that might be dealing with this same issue, what you got here is a left compressive strategy, anterior and posterior. And so this is going to be one of the easier ways for you to address these kind of things. Hope that's helpful. I apologize for being rushed today, but I am short on time. Everybody have a great Wednesday. Remember, coffee and coach's conference call tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Hope to see you there. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.